Kumlan Lablat Gemara, we are up to Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. We are up to the two dots right in the middle of the page. We're continuing to learn the same idea about dividing houses and moving in rights of neighbors and so on. So the Gemara says over here, the Mishnah said, that a field you cannot divide unless there's 9 kavan left to each person. Then it makes sense for each one to have a field of 9 kavan, which is 1.5 sa, which is about 3,750 square amas, or it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's 9 half kavan, which is really 4.5 sa, which is much smaller, half the size of that field. So in fact, they're not even arguing. It depends how fertile your soil is. If your soil is very fertile, then even a small area is workable. And if it's less fertile, you need a larger area, a larger tract of land to make it workable. So there's no argument there. Says the Gemara in Bava, where the land is even more arid, the soil there is like very heavy and it's not really full of nutrients and it doesn't grow as well. So what's the logic there? How much do you need? How much land do you need? So the Gemara says, before you can say, okay, I'm going to divide it regardless, and you have enough sufficient there. So here we're going to work more on costs than on what you produce, because there are costs. And the way it used to be is they used to plow the field twice a year. They used to plow the field after they finished the first harvest, whatever it is. They would plow the field afterwards to soften up the soil, and then they would plow it again when it came time to sow. A couple of months later. So by the time you came to sow, the soil already has all been softened up already, and therefore it's a lot less plowing. Now the problem is you have to hire a worker to go and do it for you, and even if you hire the person for a half a day, he'll still charge you for a full day. So economically, you have to work out, make sure you have a full day's work of work. The problem is that the first plowing requires more time than the second plowing. The first plowing, the ground is tough, and you have to plow it through. The second one, when it comes to the sowing, it's a lot less work because the soil is already pretty soft. So how does this work? So says the Gemara as follows: the bubble might. What would it didn't be in bubble? Omar Rabbi Yezreel says, Bei Radu Yoma. If you have sufficient land that you can give a full day's work for somebody to come in and plow the field, okay. Each one of the two partners, right? Or they're splitting up. If each partner has sufficient work for an employee for a full day, then it makes sense. Then it's worthwhile. Then you can force each other to. So Gemara asks, "My beiro du yoma." Which plowing are we referring to? We're talking about the full day's work of plowing when it comes to the sowing. Then today it'll be probably 1.5 days for the first plowing, not full 2 days, and therefore it's going to be quite expensive for them. It's not really worthwhile. And if we're talking about a full day of the first plowing, that means then when it comes to the sowing, then lo have it. It won't be a full day. So how's it work? Says the Gemara, I could tell you, I can give you either answer. We're talking about Yoma the Karba. Let's say we're talking about the day when it comes to plowing the Kodiv Vitani. When it comes to maybe you're talking about that it's a full day for the first plowing. No, the question is, the full day for the first plowing. It comes to the second plowing when you sow the seeds over there, it's only a half a day yet. But this in this neighborhood, the custom was to the second time around they will plow it twice. They will plow it in the morning, put all the seeds in there, and then plow it again the second time to cover the seeds with the sand. So between the two plowings and the sowing, that's a full day's worth of work. So it's possible. Or it was a full day for sowing, and bahadudi dabla. And when it comes to the first plowing, it actually took 2 full days. You know why? Because the ground was rough and it wasn't smooth, it wasn't flat. So you're full of hills, and so you have to work with that as well. So there's a lot more effort to first plowing than just the 1.5 days. It's 2 days worth of plowing. Omar says the Gemara. Omar Rav Nachman says. Bei Dolu. Rav Nachman says, let's say, so Rav Nachman says here, so what did I just skip? Sorry, I skipped a line. Davla, when it comes to, let's say, water, if let's say that they have a cistern, they have a well where they draw water from. So when you divide it, how do you divide it? How much of a field should each one get that they can justify that they get enough water to work their field and to irrigate the field? Rav Nachman says, Bei Dolu Yoma. Rav Nachman says that they have to have that. They'll take a full day of water, drawing water to water their field. Again, because you need a worker for a full day, and you don't want to do just a half a day's worth of work. So if this field needs to be irrigated, you have to have there a large enough field that it takes a whole entire day to irrigate the field, each partner, and then it makes sense to divide it. Anything less than that in Bavel doesn't make sense. In Israel, we said that it has to do with what the yield is, but over here in Bavel, because the yield is so low, it has to do with the costs, and that's how you divide it. Pardesa, what about a vineyard? Amar Abu Shmuel says, Bash Loishes Kavin, the minimum size of a vineyard, if each one ends up with 3 kavin, a half a saw, you can divide it. Tanya Namach, we actually learned this way. I'm going to sell you a share in my vineyard. Sumchis Oimer Lo Yivchis Megimel Kavin. The minimum you have to give is 3 kavin, then it makes sense. You can call it a vineyard. Amar Rabbi Yosef said, Ein Elu Ela Divinavius. Now, he's not being sarcastic. He's just saying there's no logic to this, what you're saying. It's like in Nevi'us. In Nevi'us, there's no logic to it. It's just the way it is. It's prophecy. So this halacha that you just said here, maybe we'll accept it, but there's no logic behind it. Why 3 kavin? The Bavel, what about in Bavel, where you need more, a greater tract of land and so on to produce things? In Bavel, it's a whole different story. In Bavel, you need Flas Atziosa, you have to have 3 rows of Trese Gufne, and each row should have 12 vines, and that's what you need. It'll take the entire day. Again, in Bavel, the yield is so much less. The primary concern here is costs, and if the primary concern is cost, then we need that you should have a full day's worth of work. So that basically means 3 rows, 12 vines per row. Talking about Nevi'us, after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, talking about the Bayis Sheni, after the structure second Beis Hamikdash, the Nevi'us left the Nevi'im and was transferred over to the Chachamim. Otu Chacham Lav Navihu. And this is reference to what Rabbi Yossi says, Ein Elu Ela Divin Nevi'us. He made a law. It sounds like it's based on Nevi'us, not based on any logic. So he says that after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, the Nevi'us went to the Chachamim. Saying, what a Chacham can be a Navi? Sounds like prior to during the second Beis Hamikdash, the Nevi'im were not Chachamim. But after Churban, they took away the Nevi'us from ordinary people and gave it to Chachamim. So of course, the Chacham had Nevi'us prior as well. That wasn't one of the criteria, but it wasn't, let's say, but the Chiddush is that after the Beis Hamikdash, it wasn't Nevi'us, it was through Chachma. But their Chachma was tantamount to Nevi'us. The Chacham actually is better than Navi, because not only he repeats things, but he's heard, but he also understands. Shneimar says the Navi levav Chachma, and the Navi brings Chachma. So a Chacham is greater than a Navi. We see from here, and the Ramban learns. He learns that when the Chachamim say things in the Gemara and onwards, it's like Nevi'us. He called it Ruach HaKodesh. It is Ruach HaKodesh. And because it is Ruach HaKodesh, the Baal Shem Tov said that not only the Tanoim, Namarayim, and the Gaonim, but the Rishonim, and even the early Acharonim, and the two opinions, what he actually said, till and including the Mashar and the Mashal, or till and including the Shach and the Taz and Shulchan Aruch, everything they wrote was written with Ruach HaKodesh, because the Nevi'us was given over to the Chachamim. It was given to the Chachamim. So it says here, the Navi Levav Chachma, that a Navi has a lave of Chachma. When you're saying the Navi has the heart of Chachma, which means the Chachma is greater than a Navi. You always take the smaller thing and you make it predicated on the larger thing. I'll prove it to you that a Chacham also has Ruach HaKodesh. Because like you find sometimes a great man says something, and then suddenly you find out, it took you so long to come up with this idea, you find out somebody else said exactly the same thing. How can another Chacham come up with exactly the same thing? It must be that it's Nevi'us. Over my question, what's the question? Maybe they're both of the same ilk, they both have the same mazel, they think the same way, and therefore they came up with the same idea. Who said it's Nevi'us? I'll bring a raya, somebody that you cannot say that I am in the same level as that person. Somebody said something great. You find it later, said the same thing. How did you come up with this? It was Nevi'us. It was actually a story with the Bes Yosef that once he struggled with a Rambam for a week, and he worked, tried to reconcile a Rambam that contradicted itself, and eventually came up with a pshat. And the following day, he was in the Beis HaMedrash somewhere in Sfas, and he heard a young man saying over exactly the same shot. And he was very disheartened. It took him a week to come up with this idea, and then later he found someone else had the same idea. So he had a cholam, his Magid, he had a Magid I used to learn with him. And the Magid, they wrote a sefer Magid Mesharim. This is all the discussions they had between Yosef and the Malach. And the Malach said to him, you shouldn't be disheartened, because once he brought down that seichel into the world, others were able to figure it out as well. So he brought it down. But here the Gemara is saying that maybe it's an act of Nevi'us. If you yourself were a big Chacham and you came up with something Rabbi Akiva, which you're totally not in the same realm as Rabbi Akiva, he was a whole different category, means that there's Nevi'us involved, Ruach HaKodesh involved. Amar Rav Ashi, who said, maybe punkt in this Seichel, you were, similar to Rabbi Akiva. I'll bring it out. You said something, you came up with something, you conceived with an idea, and then you find out later there's actually halacha l'Moshe Messina, but you weren't aware of. And that's definitely not in your realm, and nobody's even going to say that. Halacha Messina is everything from Moshe and Sinai, which means it's from Hashem, and therefore must be Ruach HaKodesh. Nevi'us. Says Gemara, who said the Dilma, the famous expression, maybe kisuma ba'aruba. Maybe it's like a blind person who is walking on the skylight, happens to be across the skylight. In other words, you just guessed. You had no idea. It wasn't anything more than a lucky guess. Says the Gemara, the lav time of Yod Moshe. It's not a lucky guess. We're talking about a chacham who comes up with an idea and he gives us a logic to it. Later we find out that it's actually halacha Moshe Messina. When we get halacha Moshe, we have no logic. So the logic is totally his, and yet his outcome, his conclusion is exactly the same. Halacha Moshe Sinai tells you that a chacham has nevi'us, or the Ramban says has ruach hakodesh. Says the Gemara. After the Chur Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, Nitla Nevuah Min Hanaviyim, V'Nitna L'Shaitim U'Letzanai. It was given to Shaitim and young children who have no understanding of what they're saying, and words just come out of their mouth. In fact, a Navi was always called a Meshuggah, because at the time when he's receiving the Nevi'us, he has to completely lose himself, stop thinking for himself, and just be completely bottle and subordinate to whatever is coming into your mind, into your head, and that's what you have to repeat. So after basically destroyed, Shaitan, like we have we'll have that if you don't know what to do, you go to a child and you say, Psaikli Psukecha, what did you learn in school today? And then you can act on that. And it's not considered that you're doing magic or all that kind of stuff. And here you see right here, because the Nevi'us were given to Tanaikas. So the Gemara tells us the story. Mai, what's the story? Shaitim, first of all, Shaitim Mai, what's the story of the Shaitim? We do see that they have Nevi'us. He was once in the marketplace in Mechuz, Shami, like he heard a Shaita just talking to himself loud. The Kamar said, the head of the yeshiva, the Molech, the head of the yeshiva that is going to be appointed, Mechasya, in the city of Mechasya, Tavyumi Chasim. He signs his name by the name of Tavyumi. In other words, in the city of Chassid, they're searching and making, they're doing a search for a Rosh Yeshiva, and whoever applies, his name will be Tivyumi. He signs it, will win the job. Amar, so Mar Bava Basra said to himself, Man Chasim Tivyumi. Who signs himself Tivyumi? By the bottom of a letter. But as far as I know, I'm the one who does it. Tavyumi, a good day. Ishmami, no, it must be Ledikaim Lishait. It must be this shait is foretelling that it's my turn to apply for this job. And look what happened, a little unfair. He went also, and he came to the city of Mechasya. Also, while he came, Einu Rabbanan was concluded in the committee, the search committee. They were going to appoint Rab Acha from Difti to become the head of the yeshiva. Kivan the Shamid also, when they heard that Mar Bava Basra came to town, they wanted to consult him if he thought it was a good idea. He would have a better idea of Rab Acha B'Difti if he was a Talmud Chacham and worthy of that position. They sent a pair of rabbis to Mar Bava Bastra's house. Lam Lucha to consult with him. He held them down in his house and he fabrained with them, and they didn't go back. Meanwhile, the committee is waiting. They needed his approval. Said another group, he kept them there as well. Sent 5 groups, and now we had 10 people sitting there in his house. Even the Moleh Asad, as soon as there were 10 people in his house, he started to darshan for them and give them a share, and they realized what kind of great Talmid Chacham he was, how superior he was to everyone else, including Rabacha. Why did he gather 10 people? Because you don't, this is interesting, you shouldn't give a share unless you have a minimum of 10 people. Interesting. Ain't placing Bekala unless you have 10 people. So today with Zoom and YouTube and all these other things and Spotify, you never know. You can have 10 people minimum or more. Actually, I think YouTube demands you have 100 subscribers before they allow you on and so on. So therefore, we have to have a minimum of 10 people before you give a proper share. And as a result of that, Marbarashi got the job. Rabachi said about himself, once the tables are turned against you, it's not so quick that it turns around again and you go up. In other words, as long as things are going, if things are going well, we don't turn it around. As long as things are going well, we need a good reason to change it around. Whenever something is happening, if you want to change it, you need a good reason. So if things are going well, as long as you don't have a very good reason to stop that, even though you might not be necessarily worthy of it anymore, we'll continue going. And vice versa. If things are chashom not going very well, it's not going to turn unless you have a good reason to turn. The tshuva, you have to have a good reason to turn. If you don't have a good reason to turn, even though you're a bit better than before, things are not going to turn. So he said, Leiba Meheda. And later on in life, we learned in Bava Basra, nothing happened. He thought, he was hopeful that eventually he'll get the job. After a while, he realized Bava Basra is set. He's not going anywhere. He later changed around and he said that somebody things are not going well for you, it never changes. Murphy's Law. Tanaika, what's the case of the girl? Mayi, what's the story there? Now, interesting, the Gemara now translates Tanaika as a girl, but before we said Tanaika, it means youngsters. So Lav Dafka, it's a girl. It's a girl or a boy, but this is just a story. The Bas Rav Chizda was wealthy and he had a daughter, and she's very pretty. Remembering her, so was she was sitting when she was a young girl, very young girl. She was sitting on her father's lap. And Rav Chizda had a couple of students in front of him. One was Rava, and one was Rami Bachama. And Rami Bachama, we have numbers of times in Shas. He used to ask all of these Iboyas questions that we were left for Elio to answer. Very profound questions. Amallah, he turned to his daughter. He said, "Man minayu bayis." So who amongst you wants this young girl? She said, "Tavai, I want them both. I don't want you to want them both." Now, the only way you can have, there's two parts. The Mashal learns a beautiful shot in the Gemara here, as we'll see in a minute. I'll tell you in a minute. So Amar Rav said, "Va'ano basta." He right jumped in, and I want to be the last. I want to be the second. And that's what happened. Rambam married, passed away, and Rabba then married her. And why did Rambam say the same thing? So he said like this: Rava was a kohen. Taisha says that Rava was a kohen. He came from Avi. A kohen. Now, there's only two possibilities that you can marry two men. Either the first husband will die, or the first husband will be divorced. So now, when Rava said, "I want to be," the second one is what he meant was that. Don't try to remember what Mashal says. He meant that he was hoping. Sorry. It's all the way around, I think. Even though Tracy says Rabba was a kohen, others say Rabba was not a kohen. It was Rabba who was a kohen. Rabba and Abaye, not the Rabba. So if Rabba and Rabba Chama was a kohen. So if Rabba was not a kohen, he said, "Look, I'll be second because I'm hoping that it'll be merely a divorce, not Chas V'Shalom that he'll pass away, be a divorce, and I'll marry her." But Rami Bachama was not a kohen either. But Rami Bachama said that he would never marry a divorcee because there are four people. Then there's two. There'll be two people in bed: the previous husband and this husband, and constantly comparing. So Rami Bachama said he'll never marry a divorcee. So the only way that he can marry this Basar Chizah second is if Rabba passed away. He didn't want to curse Rabba. So he did not say, "I want to be second," because the only way he would marry her second is if Rava passed away. He wouldn't say that. Rava, on the other hand, had no problem marrying a divorcee, and he was not a kohen. Rava, on the other hand, had no problem marrying a divorcee. So therefore, he said, "I will hope I'm second, and it would be just a case of divorce, so I can marry her." And he wasn't cursing Rava Bachama that Chas V'Shalom he should pass away. What actually happened was Rava Bachama did pass away. That's what the Mashal says. The Pshat in this Gemara here is. Rabbi Dimi said him in Haifa. Rabbi Dimi from Haifa said, he said here, I just lost the place. He said, in the morning before you eat, you drink yesh leishtei levavos. You have two hearts. What do you mean you have two hearts? The Mishnah it said maybe that's what it means. In Mishnah it says leiv chacham b'yaminoi, the leiv ksil b'smoila. The heart of a wise man on the right, and the heart of a fool is on the left side. So a person has two hearts, and which way will you go today? You behave like a wise person or not? And because you haven't eaten, you're not settled, you haven't been able to think things through because your mind doesn't work. And Nachman said until you eat a piece of meat, so therefore you couldn't think. You can go either direction.
So is he Rabbi Abdimi because he's from Israel rather than Rab Abdimi?
It says Mechaifa, yeah, it should be Rebbe, yes. But in the Gemara it doesn't spell out. It just says a Reish. You're right, it should be Rebbe. You are correct. So he said, but so Rebbe Avdimi, after you eat and after you drink, so now you're settling thinking through. You have only one heart, and hopefully it's the wise person's heart, and not actually there's a beautiful word. The Magid. The Magid saw a whole bunch of people in shul on Shabbos afternoon sitting, and they were just chatting away and talking nonsense. So he said to them, it says Sheina b'Shabbos Tainug, that which could either be, it could be sleeping or learning in Shabbos, but not just to sit and spend your time talking and wasting your time. And they answered back, how do you know it's Sheina b'Shabbos or Sheina b'Shabbos? Maybe it's Sicha b'Shabbos Tainug. It's a sin. Maybe you should talk on Shabbos, just sit and socialize and talk nonsense. So he said, this is what Shlomo Melech said. Leiv, which is the heart, is also a pintala, the point. Leiv chacham, the chacham places the point, being on the right side, so therefore Shabbos is either Sheina b'Shabbos Tainug or Sheina b'Shabbos Tainug. But Leiv ksil, the point that the ksil, the fool, puts is b'smoilai on the left side, which makes it a sin, and Sicha b'Shabbos Tainug. Anyway, ein lo ela leibach, you only have one heart. Shnemar, it says in Pasuk, ish nevuv yilvav. It says that a ish nevuv, a person who is hollow, who is empty, yilvav, has lots of hearts. Uksiv. And how do I know nevuv means hollow? Because it says by the mizbeach, you should build it. Mizbeach aprimi. In the mizbeach, it says nevuv luchas. The board should be nevuv hollow. And we translate cholul luchin. Hollow. If you drink wine, I feel even though you're very shy and you're an introvert and your heart is closed like a virgin, you never opened your heart to anybody. Wine heals that, it opens it up. Remember, it says v'tidosh, and wine opens up psulas, those who are virgins. Okay, that finishes that part. I got it. Back to the Gemara. Pshita, there's no question. Let's say you have two brothers. One is a b'chair and one is a brother, and the b'chair gets a double portion, and the other brother gets one. And we had in the end of Bava Metzia all about the concept of bar mitzvah, that the neighbor has first rights to buy the property. So the question is, does the b'chair have the right to say, I want to have both properties next to each other? I'm getting two properties or two fields, and you're getting one. I want both fields to be abutting each other. Like a bar mitzvah, you give him a chad mitzvah, you give the b'chair all on one boundary. In other words, we would have thought that's not so pashut, because we would have thought that maybe the brother can say, I like the field that's in the east side. We had before, ruchnis, a person going to go to kedushin in the beginning of the I want this side, I want that side, I'm not happy, I want the north, I want the south. We would have thought that the brother can say, there's a valid reason why I want one of those two fields that you want. Commercial that you don't. Or we would have thought that two brothers, maybe the brother gets two portions, not like one person gets another portion. He's like two brothers. It's like three brothers. If you have three brothers and two brothers gang up and say, we want to have two fields next to each other, the third brother doesn't have to acquiesce, doesn't have to agree at all. So the question is, how do we view a b'chair? Is a b'chair considered two brothers? He's like two people, and therefore he gets both properties, and then maybe he doesn't get bar mitzvah. So he must say, no, we treat a b'chair like one person. The Torah calls a b'chair is one person who gets a double portion, and therefore he's entitled to bar mitzvah. The question is, what about a Yavam? Reuven passed away, Shimon marries his wife, and Shimon now takes over Reuven. Is Shimon treated like a b'chair? It's a double portion that when their father dies, he gets right next to each other? Or no, Shimon now is Shimon and Reuven. He is two brothers. Yitzhak is two brothers. And therefore he cannot, foist his desires on his brother. And his brother says, no, I want that field that you want budding yours. Which one is it? Abai says, it would seem to me, he the same did my time. The Torah calls him a b'chair. And because it says in the pasuk, he's a b'chair, so therefore the Torah is trying to tell us that he has the same status as a b'chair. He's not Reuven and Shimon, he is Shimon who gets a double portion. Rava says no. Amakra, look carefully in the pasuk, it says in the pasuk that that the oldest brother is the one who will marry. Asher Taylor. All it is the b'choy when it comes to marriage. When it comes to marriage, he is considered the one who should be marrying first because he is the b'choy. When it comes to marriage, when it comes to dividing the property, he's not b'choy. There's two people, and therefore he's not entitled. Now the Gemara has a number of new cases. Somebody bought a property on the boundary, two opinions, whether on his own family or his wife's family. Kiko Paugu, then the father passed away, Nadayash, and he said, look, Alaba Metzra, I want the field of our father, which is abutting my field. Give me. This is a classical case of midas daim. That what does matter to you? The other children, where you get your property, and this person bought a property abutting his father's property, so therefore you should let him have his part of the rusha right next to it. Masker Rabbi Yosef, no, the brothers have a tinus. That's midas daim is when there's no loss whatsoever. Here there is a slight loss, and what is that? They say, no, the property that you want is more valuable to us, like this very rich person, Bamarian, who would pay extra to get his property, and therefore they would say, no. We believe that the property you have is better. Why is it better? So Rashi says we're talking about a case where it's based on rain. There's no irrigation; it's rain, and therefore you find sometimes that it rains, on one property, it doesn't rain on another property, and we feel that this property it rains more than the other one. That's our gut feeling, and therefore it's to our disadvantage to give it to you. Then it's no longer a midas daim. Taisus actually clarifies this something very interesting. We learned before the whole time about that if somebody's a squatter and he owns properties and you have a property, you don't plan to rent it out anyway, so it's zenena, he's benefiting and you have nothing to lose. Or zenena, let's say better, he would have to rent. But now he has a property he's squatting, and you have nothing to lose because you weren't planning anyway. So we say, midas daim, what do you care if he's staying there? So Taisus says that only applies once it happened. Once the guy moved in and you want to toss him out, then we say, look, midas daim. But l'chatchila, you have every right to hold him, to prevent it from coming in. Just because I'm not planning to rent out the property, it doesn't give you the right just to move in. Zen and l'chas is only like a b'di'evadik thing. Once it happened, not l'chatchila. So here also, l'chatchila, why should we have to give you the field? If we were to give you the field and now we want to claim it back, zen and l'chas. But if we, l'chatchila, why should we? So anyone further? Another case. And the halacha Rabbi Yosef that the Yisraelim have a right to say it's not loy chaser. We feel that that field is better than other ones. Okay, unless you pay us, compensate us. So what about the following? Today Arata, Taisus learns the whole Gemara a little bit differently, but we'll just learn Rashi. Today Arata, two pieces of land. Atzei Nagra. Each piece of land has their own well, their own irrigation. So Amar Rabba, and so the one brother says, look, I'll take one entire field with its irrigation, and you'll take one entire field irrigation. Fair enough. Amar Rabba goes, this surely each one will end up, with a source for irrigation. You have a well, so or some canal, no problem. Masker said, no, still there's a problem. No, the brothers, they prefer we divide each land in half, and therefore I have two tracts of land with a source of water. I think that's better than having one tract of land with one source of water. And why is that? Because sometimes this creek dries up, the creek bed dries up, and this one doesn't. And therefore, I'd rather hedge my bets and have two smaller fields, but each one has their own source of irrigation. What about Tarti Achad Nagra? Two fields, but there's only one source of irrigation. And they're both the same source. And one guy says, I'll take the field on the right, you take the field on the left. Now, l'chayda, what are you going to say here? L'chayda, it's you can't say, it'll dry up. They're both affected. And if it won't dry, they both have a source of irrigation. So why then shouldn't you be fair and just say, okay, you keep that land and I'll keep this land? I'm going to be here. I agree with Rabbi. There's no argument that the brothers can have. No, we'd rather cut each land into two. No reason for it. There's one source of water for both fields, and therefore it only makes sense. Maskul Abai might say, no, okay, maybe there's no loss, but it's a loss of profit. Why? Because Matzi Amar, maybe the brothers can say, if we don't let you have the land abutting your land, let's say, and therefore you're going to have to buy a land on the other side of the land that I'm going to keep. I'm going to keep the middle land. You have the land on the left, and then you're going to get the Yerushalayim land on the right. So then you're going to have all of these workers working on the right and separately on the left. And meanwhile, my field will be totally protected from ganavim or from wild animals because I have free protection. I have an advantage if you have both fields. Why should I give that up? I have to have more workers. And so Abaye is learning that a loss of profit is tantamount to a loss. And Abaye says, no, a loss of profit is not a loss. Just because you didn't make a profit, that's not a loss. A loss is when you actually lose money. The Hilchasa, the halach is Rabbi Yosef, like as you know, my uncle tells me that he once met a very wealthy man called Sir Isaac Wolfson from England, who was also a very big philanthropist. And he once told my uncle, "Come into my meeting with accountants, you'll see something." So he came in, and he had a whole bunch of accountants. And he said to them, "Tell me the difference between an asset and a liability." So obviously each accountant gave his interpretation, and he said to them, "You're all wrong. A liability is real. You made a loss. An asset has to yet has to be realized. Profits, a loss of profit, you can't say, oh, I had a loss. You never had a profit in the first place. So it's not a loss. A loss is when you actually lose. And that's what Yosef is saying. Not like a Abaye who felt that a loss of profit is a loss. That's not an argument at all. Okay, top of the page here. One more case. What about Chad Gisa Nagra? And there's a big machlek Rashi tells how to learn. We'll see the diagrams right here. Chad Gisa Nagra, Chad Gisa Nagra. One side you have, let's say, a canal, and one side you have a river. You look at the picture of Rashi over here. Let's say on the east side you have over here the river, and on the north side you have a canal. Now, how are you going to split this property? If you're going to split the property down, from top to bottom, from east to west, one guy's going to end up with a half a river and no canal. Another guy will end up with one entire field will have a canal and half the river. That's not fair. If we do it, let's say we divide it from north to south, right down the middle, dissect in the middle, then one guy will end up with a river and half of the canal. The other guy's only half canal. Again, it's not fair. So what should you do? Palgin law, we divided Mekarnazol. You see how we divided into 8? You divide the land into 8 parts. Each one gets one part of river. Each one gets one part of canal, and then the other side they get nothing. And this is how you see it here. So you have Reuben. Reuben has on the right part of the river and the part of the canal, and then he has the Torim and Marim, and they have Shimon. Traces learns, if you look at the top left hand side, Bechanan learns that the river is on one corner and the canal is on another corner. So instead of dividing it, vertically or horizontally, divide it diagonally. And this way each one gets a part of the river and a part of the canal. You can't do a trade-off. You get the river, not get the canal, because the river is a much better source of water than a canal is. A canal dry up if there's a drought, and a river is constant streaming water. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.